Thank you so much for coming. I'm Rochelle Diamond. I'm on our employee experience team, and I run our LinkedIn speaker series. Before we get started, I just want to take a quick minute to remind everyone what our speaker series is all about. Our goal is to bring inspiring ideas and innovative thinkers to LinkedIn to make our employees and our members more productive and successful. And I always like to remind you, you can see the past speakers at speakers.linkedin.com. And we also now have podcasts on iTunes, so you can download those and listen to them on your commute while you're waiting for cereal to come out in the fall. So we're really incredibly lucky today to have such an inspiring and innovative thinker with us today, Matthieu Ricard. He has a very busy schedule in the Bay Area this week, so we're really, really fortunate that he's taken the time to come speak with us today. He was born in France, and then he left a career in cellular genetics to move to the Himalayas to study Buddhism about 45 years ago. So as a trained scientist and a Buddhist monk, he's really uniquely positioned in this dialogue between East and West. He's an international best-selling author, and he also is an acclaimed speaker on the world stage. Over 4 million people have seen his TED Talk on happiness. So for the past 5 years, he's been writing this book that you all have, Altruism, The Power of Compassion to Change Yourself in the World. And we're really looking forward to hearing from him today more about this. One note about the book is that all the proceeds from the book actually go to Karuna Sechin, his nonprofit organization that funds humanitarian projects in Tibet, Nepal, and India. And I have another special treat today. Our very own CEO, Jeff Weiner, is going to be in conversation with Matthieu. And we're really looking forward to hearing their dialogue. We know Jeff is very passionate about the topic of compassion and speaks often of compassionate management. So we're really, it's going to be a fascinating discussion. And you can share content from this talk. Our hashtag for the speaker series is InSpeaker. And the Twitter handles, which will come up on the screen in a minute, are at Jeff Weiner and at Matthieu_Ricard. So with that, please join me in welcoming Jeff and Matthieu to the stage.
Matthieu, thank you so much for being here. This is beyond a privilege. So we had a chance to meet backstage for the first time, and I was half joking that if there is such a thing as transitive mentorship, this would be an example of it. As someone I consider to be a mentor, Ray Chambers, considers Matthieu to be a mentor and very influential in his life. And so in many respects, I feel like I understand some of Matthieu's philosophy, but I have long admired him from afar. He's one of the world's most extraordinary foremost thinkers on a number of subjects that I think many of us here at LinkedIn are not only very passionate about, but very committed to. Mindfulness, compassion, altruism. And what makes Matthieu so unique, I mean, there are many things that make him unique, which we're going to get into in just a moment, but this blend of East and West, of science and spirituality, of Buddhism and capitalism, there's really very few people in the world like Matthieu that have dedicated their lives to understanding the benefits of these dimensions, not only from a spiritual perspective, but as I mentioned, the scientific perspective as well, which leads to a number of interesting aspects of Matthieu's life that we're going to make sure to delve into. So I'll kick it off with some questions, and then we'll turn it over to the audience, and we'll invite them to do some Q&A. I want to start with origins. I'm always interested in the path and the journey that people have been on that enabled them to accomplish what they've accomplished. Your father was a renowned French philosopher. Yes. Your mother, a renowned French painter. Your uncle, a renowned sailor and explorer. So we love Venn diagrams in the Valley, Matthieu. So if we did a Venn diagram and each of those were circles, it feels like you are right in the middle of that.
Okay.
So could you talk a little bit about what it was like to grow up in that environment and what kind of influence it had on you?
Well, when you are a kid and a teenager, you don't think in terms of notoriety or who is famous or not. You just have parents and relatives, and you see people who come at your dinner table. And then later you sort of discover that there's sort of, big shots. And, when I was 16, I had lunch with Stravinsky, and I thought, wow, that's great. I mean, I knew, of course, who he was at that time. But one thing that really, retrospectively, when I think about that, one thing that sort of puzzled me, although I didn't know how to put it in words, was that there were people having extraordinary qualities, obviously, either as philosophers, writers, artists, mathematicians. But then it was hard to make an obvious correlation with being good human beings. I mean, I don't mean that they were all sort of means and whatever, but you would get the same sort of sample or distribution of extremely nice people, like our friend Wes Chambers, wonderful people that you admire, and pretty, people difficult to be with, And then that would be the same in 100 gardeners, 100 mathematicians, 100 philosophers, so there was no obvious correlation between that. So it was kind of puzzling because you would want to play the piano like Sviatoslav Richter or the chess like Bobby Fischer, but to be exactly like Bobby Fischer, he was a pretty difficult guy. So it's not what you want to be. So that was sort of, then what do you want to become? So when I was 20 and I first traveled to the Himalayas, because I've seen a documentary on all those great Tibetan masters who fled the invasion of Tibet, and suddenly I look at those documentaries. There was 20 Socrates, 20 Saint Francis of Assisi, whoever you might admire, alive with different type of faces, but they had this kind of common quality as human beings. So when I went there, the difference is that there were people who were, the messenger was the message. What they were teaching, they were embodying it all the way. And therefore you say, wow, if I could know someone like the Dalai Lama, which I've been fortunate to be close for many, many years, if I could become a little bit like this person, not just know what they know or have the skill that they have, that seems to be a very powerful source of inspiration. So that was the difference, I think, the sort of the teaching that I got out of this childhood.
Did your studies of molecular biology, cellular genetics, in any way prepare you and open your eyes up to the power of mindfulness and compassion and altruism? I know you were studying, you got your PhD in cellular genetics before embarking on 25 years of study as a Buddhist monk. Did that prepare you in some way? Because I think in the West, more often than not, we draw a clear distinction between those two worlds, and I think for you, a big part of your path has been the convergence between those.
So I would not say that, studying the cell division in bacteria helped me, maybe about mindfulness, because you have to be, concentrated on what you do. But about compassion and altruism, I'm not sure about the altruistic behavior of Escherichia coli.
Maybe an interest, that could be your next book, by the way.
They look pretty simple behavior, or neither selfish either. But so I would rather say that the main quality that I got from my boss, François Jacob, who with Monod was won 2 Nobel Prize of Medicine. They found the RNA messenger, who translate the genetic code into proteins. So there was a big discovery. It's really the sort of unchangeable sort of desire of being rigorous. No, sort of thing that just completely doesn't stand to analysis, to reason, to confrontation with reality. And Buddhism, after all, is a kind of science because it's trying to bridge the gap between the perceptions and reality. Because you might perceive something or someone or a situation as 100% desirable or 100% hateable. But 99% of, not 99, but a good deal of that is your mental projections. A flower, a rose is a beautiful thing for a poet. For a snail, it's a nice meal, and for a tiger, it means nothing. Why does he care for a rose? So all these understanding of how the mind works, what is our relation with the world, how we translate outer circumstances, either in happiness or misery. It's a very empirical and rigorous approach. So that sort of taste for rigorousness has remained with me all the time. And some of my Buddhist friends, they say, you know, if Matthieu can become a Buddhist, anyone, because he's so skeptical. I mean, because I don't like nonsense stuff. You know?
So after studying Buddhism for about 25 years, you and your father sat down for a series of conversations that became a highly acclaimed book, aptly titled The Monk and the Philosopher. And could you talk a little bit about what you believe so captured people's imagination after that book was first published?
Well, you know, it was kind of funny because when I started going back a little bit to France, and my father was a well-known journalist, writer, polemist, and we never talk about big ideas, you know, why I did all that and what is Buddhist philosophy about. But I used to feed him about the news about the situation in Tibet. So he was on the first one among the French journalists to speak about that. People say, why? He suddenly gets interested in that question. But then one day I was in our monastery in 97, and we just had a telephone for the first time. And I got a call, you know, would you do a book of dialogue with your father? I said, whoa, my father, you know, is well-known agnostic, very, very sort of kind of cynical sort of writer. You know, he will never do a book with a Buddhist monk, even as his son, no way. So then 15 days later, they say, you know, they called me, I said, you know, he accepted. I thought, wow, you know, I'm getting in trouble there. So I said, you know, like football players, they want to play on their own turf. So I said, let him come to Nepal then. I will speak on. So we went to the mountain.
Home field advantage.
We went to a resort, and for 10 days we had this wonderful dialogue. And my father I admired his of intellectual openness. Because he said, you know, Greek philosopher would ask 3 questions. What can I know? How should I lead my life? And how should I govern the city or the country? And he said, what can I know? Mostly science has answered that question, at least for knowing the outer world. You know, how should I govern the city? You know, democracy, you know, is kind of the best system, no matter what. And then, how should I lead my life? He says, Western philosophy has given up. From Descartes onwards, they just make huge systems that nobody understands, and they don't really tell you how to lead your life. So he said, maybe Buddhism as a philosophy, art of life, is filling that gap. He was interested into that, so we had this wonderful dialogue. And I think because of the openness, because of his vast culture, and me trying to respond the best I could, you know, it sort of clicked something in people's minds. So, and then also he taught me how superficial it is to be sort of recognizable, although I'm kind of a walking flag. But, you know, I was totally 25 years in the Himalayas, totally unknown of everybody, living a very quiet life in hermitages near my teachers. And then suddenly, because of that, the next day in the street, people recognize you, they stop. Can I give you a ride? I'd like to talk with you. I said, no, I just arrived. They say, oh, never mind, we'll do round the block and stuff like that. So, and then you see, okay, I'm the same guy. You know, this is all about media and stuff like that. So you don't get a big head, but you say, okay, if I can use that to share ideas that are dear to me, that have really, really helped me for 25 years, why not?
So while we were backstage, I was asking Matthieu how often he gets a chance to come to Silicon Valley. And he mentioned several times, but perhaps not as often as all of us would like. And he said, you know, he travels quite a bit. And of course, he lives in the Himalayas, which is not necessarily like right around the corner. So it was interesting to be reminded of that. He literally lives in the Himalayas. So after the book came out, as you mentioned, you were vaulted into a whole nother echelon of notoriety. Within a few years, shortly thereafter, some folks at the University of Wisconsin-Madison conducted a study with you that has become somewhat famous. And they did a series of intensive brain scans. And they ultimately concluded that Matthieu and people like Matthieu that had spent at least 10,000 hours in meditation.
Most of them 50,000 hours.
50,000 hours?
Yeah.
Some of them 50,000 hours. It's a lot of meditation. That may be longer than some of the people here have been alive, Matthieu. So just to put that into perspective. But folks who had practiced meditation to that extent were activating, very clearly physiologically activating certain parts of the brain that reflected areas like altruism. And he went on, he did a documentary shortly thereafter, and in the documentary they were probably trying to figure out a way to introduce Matthieu and promote the documentary, and they tabbed him the happiest man in the world. by virtue of the measures. And talk a little bit about A, what that's like to have that title, the happiest man in the world, and B, and more importantly, what that study revealed,
yes.
because there's very important signs there that go well beyond that.
So that documentary actually, they came to Madison to the lab in the MRI, and then they made a transition where I was coming down from the mountains in Nepal. And that was the last word. Maybe this is the happiest person in the world. Well, it was quiet for a few years until a journalist in England from the Independent got upon that documentary and then made the cover story, the first front page. We found Mr. Happy, the happiest person in the world.
Big picture of you with a big smile on your face.
And then suddenly I got these frantic calls from my mother, from the clinic where I found that BBC is looking for you. So I thought maybe something terrible happened, I don't know. So I called them back at midnight and they say, we want you live on the news hour, So what's going on? And then they say about the happiest person in the world. I say, oh, really? So I say, no, anyone, you and me can be the happiest woman or man in the world if you look for happiness in the right place, nothing special with me. So, but anyway, so then I thought it's going to die off very quickly, and I made a small disclaimers to there was no blog at that time. I apologized to my scientist friend. I said, I'm sorry for that. I had nothing to do. But then it went on and on. There was a newspaper in the Singapore Morning Times, in Chile, and every 2-3 years it comes up again. So it's like this piece of Scotch tape that you can't get your fingers on. So then one of my teachers said, leave it like that, Don't try to sort of do anything, just use it for a good purpose. So it's better than being called the unhappiest person in the world, of course. Nothing scientific. So what the real study was showed, but anyway, I can use it to propagate good ideas about altruism when telling, selfish happiness doesn't work, so get some ideas through. So anyway, what the study actually were showing, we were engaging not in I'm happy, but in compassion meditation. And that's what's interesting actually and fits very well with what I think now. And then when myself, it was the first chronologically, but then 25 other subjects, by no means all Tibetan monks, they were men and women, lay people and monastics, Westerners and Easterners. So that's only criteria was having done between 10 to 60,000 hours of meditation. So for all those subjects, without exception, the activation of certain areas of the brain connected with positive affect, with empathy, with a sense of parental love, maternal love, sense of belonging, affiliation, sense of, they call it reward, but it's more like sense of wholesomeness, very positive mental state, were vastly more activated than in a control group of similar ages and similar education and so forth. But this few hundred people were tested against those 25. It's not 7 billion people, so it's like that. But in fact, these activations were suddenly, they said, of an amplitude that was never recorded in neuroscience before. So, but the interesting point, because you say, 60,000 hours, good for you, then what are we going to do with that for us? So the next step, of course, was to see what happens if you do it 20 minutes for 3 months. And then there was significant change in your level of well-being, immune system was boosted. What about 1 month? And 1 month you could see already a structural change in the brain. In some area related to acquiring novel skills. Like when you learn juggling, those areas increase, or when you learn chess or play the piano or whatever. And then there was a 2-week study conducted by Richard Davidson on compassion that shows a significant increase compared to a control group of pro-social behavior, and in the brain a shrinking already visible of the amygdala, which is an area of the brain that has to do with anger and fear. So that's a good news, because it means that you don't have to, which is nice, of course, I recommend that highly to do 60,000 hours of meditation, but a much more sort of accessible schedule can do that. And then if you still think that 20 minutes is too much, then you can do, I think Meng of Google came here, he has this 10 seconds meditation every hour. Who can say you don't have 10 seconds? So I thought when he first said that in front of the Dalai Lama, I thought, that's really Meng, this guy is too much. But in fact, when I thought about it, 10 seconds of looking around and thinking, you don't go and hugging people and you might get in trouble. But you think, may this person be safe? No, may this person be happy, flourish in life. May this she be spared and their dear ones spare suffering. So now, 10-second man seems nothing if you go back to slapping people in the face the next. But if you really feel that for 10 seconds, and then it's like opening a bottle of perfume. 10 seconds and you close it, but the perfume lingers. And if you open it often enough, that kind of mindset will sort of, like a trickle, will go on. So I think this is actually quite deep. And then 10 seconds, we all have 10 seconds every hour. Don't tell me you don't.
I do. So there is increasingly, I think, a shared perspective that meditation, mindfulness are becoming part of the mainstream, that it's moving from kind of a fringe effort to something that is supported by science. And increasingly, as that trend continues to accelerate, to some extent, I think people will point back to Matthieu and the work that was done then and how that's continued to evolve. It's a big part of what we're all starting to experience now. One question I have for you is, prior to the science, prior to the studies that you were a participant in, why do you suppose that this part of society, a practice of greater mindfulness, has been something of a fringe approach in philosophy? Why do you suppose people have been reluctant to embrace it before the data was there, given that
Yes.
it is so closely associated with so many positive things in reality?
So I think there are many reasons for that. Eastern cultures have always have this idea of a mind science. But my father used to tell me, why? But you see, look at Nepal and India, they're so backward. I say, yes, they didn't send rockets to the moon, but they are quite advanced in knowing the mechanism of happiness and suffering. And I remember we were at MIT with the Dalai Lama on one of the Mind and Life conference on investigating the mind. And each of us were paired with a great scientist for a dialogue. And I was paired with Stephen Koslin, who was then the head of the psychology department. And I was very relieved to hear his first statement say, we must make a declaration of humility in front of the amount of empirical data that contemplatives are bringing in the field of psychology. That was neat. So you see the tendency in the West, somehow, because we were so successful in improving outer circumstances, outer conditions, getting better healthcare, increasing the lifespan and so forth, is that we tend to excessively put all our hopes and fear in outer conditions. If everything fits like that, I'll be happy, that's fine. If I don't have those conditions, I can't. But that's also neglecting the fact that we deal with our mind from morning till evening. It is the mind that translates outer circumstances in happiness or misery. So if we don't look at that, then you can be miserable in a little paradise, while at the opposite, we can see people who retain their strength, their joy of living, even in the face of adverse circumstances. So our state of mind, and we know that with the issues of depression and things like that, can easily override outer circumstances. It doesn't mean that you should neglect remedying to poverty, inequalities in society, but we should also not neglect the inner conditions for flourishing. So mindfulness, or meditation at large, which means mind training basically, it's not an exotic word, it means training your mind, training basic human qualities as skills. I think now people have found the benefit of that. 30 years ago, people were not so sedentary in a way. So now we see that doing 20 minutes 3 times a week of physical exercise is very good for physical and mental health. So it's no strange if a guy from Nepal will come here and see someone on the treadmill, this guy is mad. Why is he getting tired for nothing? But now we know we need that. So likewise, if you see someone meditating, you say, this guy is completely gone balloony. But in fact, if you increase your mental health, why not? But about mindfulness, I want to pay tribute, of course, to John Kabat-Zinn, who brought that first 35 years ago in the medical world. And if we were putting meditation at that time, it was a no-go. But, reducing stress, people say, oh, that looks interesting. So he did that. But now with the success of so-called mindfulness revolution and being everywhere in corporation, which is wonderful, I talked with him at length and I said, look, if you teach it, you are a great person, you have a good heart, So, and then as you say, as you do that, you notice that people open more to each other. There's a kind of human warmth, opening to each other, altruistic component. But it's not guaranteed. Why? Because, look at a sniper. It could be very mindful. A sniper has to be always in the present moment. There's some kind of non-judgmental attitude. If he's distracted, he has to come back. No emotion should disturb. So you can have a mindful sniper and a mindful psychopath. So the point is, you need to not expect that altruism, compassion, caring will be a sort of automatic byproduct. You need to embed it from the start, because you don't have caring snipers and caring psychopaths. So you cut through all deviation from the start. It's only 6 letters more. And in fact, you get 2 for the price of 1, because when you engage deeply, say, in this loving kindness, benevolent state of mind of meditation, you need to be mindful. Otherwise, you are distracted. So I think this is infusing that with such a wonderful quality, and I firmly believe that altruism or altruistic love is the best way to accomplish both the benefit of others and your own. It's a win-win situation. What pursuit of selfish happiness is a lose-lose situation. Now, me all day long, you feel miserable, you make everyone miserable around you, nobody's winning in that.
So a number of things that I'd love to touch on. Let's come back to altruism in just a sec. I want to stay on self-esteem and me, and how at odds sustainable self-esteem is from a more egocentric view of the world, where people believe it's all about them, the accumulation of possessions, getting to that next title, making more money, physical attractiveness. Can you talk a little bit about what sustainable self-esteem is really all about? How it can be derived, and why so many rely upon a conventional wisdom that is so inconsistent with true happiness?
So, there have been a lot of study about self-esteem, and I think the North American continent has been very strong in trying to promote self-esteem. Even a kid loses the race, he gets a prize for good participation or something like that. I have a friend called Jean Twenge. She studied narcissism and self-esteem, and she wrote a book called The Narcissistic Epidemics. And she said 1 dress out of 7 when they did the study for girls as a somewhere written princess. And then her daughter come and say, I'm a princess. And they said, no, you are not a princess. Sorry for that. You are a good girl, but you are not a princess. So then other studies have showed that self-esteem, many psychologists did that, doesn't really lead to a sense of flourishing. It does have a tendency to lead to narcissism. But self-esteem, there's different kinds of self-esteem. If you are totally have a bad image of yourself, you so-called hate yourself, then you should see that everyone has a potential for wonderful things, that you are not at all an intrinsically bad person or whatever. But the idea that you should systematically sort of promote yourself. I'm amazed when I see some of the political campaigns here. People don't say, here's my program, what I do. They say, I'm the best candidate. Why, So, because I'm the best guy, not because I have a program that is going to do good to society. So that tendency, there's a better thing, which is self-compassion or wanting good for yourself is perfect. Why you would? It's not selfish to want to flourish and be happy, and it's certainly not at the cost of others' happiness. But if you want to be really good to yourself, I think this exacerbated feeling of self-importance, which leads to excessive self-esteem and narcissism, is not helping actually to be good with yourself, because it's getting this very narrow-minded in the ego bubble that's very stuffy inside. You don't feel comfortable in that. So in this sense, self-compassion or wishing good for yourself implies accepting that we have a mixture of light and shadows, qualities and defects. We cannot be perfect all the time. We may fail in some things, and that's fine. And then that we are part of interdependent common humanity, and there's a lot of things that we share in common. We're not so special. And then that's fine, and that's great. And then you can open to others. And then you can cultivate those skills that makes you a good person and a happy person. So it seems that all the good studies on self-esteem, so that just promoting just self-esteem didn't lead to help the kids and the people. So I think it's probably better to aim at being a good person, to develop basic qualities like, openness to others, altruistic love, inner strength, inner freedom, so that you are not the slave of your own thoughts and emotions, sort of resilience, and some kind of, developing a skill, the inner resources to deal with the ups and downs of life without being too vulnerable. But if you are too ego-centered, you're so vulnerable. Because everything is like a potential threat, What is he going to tell about me or to me? Praise and blame, and every little thing becomes like a storm in a glass of water because you're so preoccupied. The whole world becomes a threat or an instrument to your so-called well-being. So I think that's not the right way to find genuine happiness.
Speaking of happiness, you wrote an entire book on the subject, very well received. And at the heart of the book, one of kind of the first principles is this notion that there's a key distinction between happiness and pleasure, that they should not be interpreted as synonymous, that pleasure is ephemeral, it's fleeting. Happiness is an essential quality born from practicing things like mindfulness and compassion. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, there's people, when we say that, people say, how can you be against pleasure? There's something you're going to be, not never eating ice cream and stuff like that. No, it's nothing wrong with pleasure. I mean, unless craving and strong fixation come in. Why is this will disturb the thing? Because craving is a tormenting state of mind. So just to strive for something, to aspire to something, to feel good and whatever, nothing wrong as long as there's no this crystallization or verification that comes from craving. But why is it a different continuum? Because first of all, pleasure depends so much on circumstances, places, time. It's a fleeting, something that is pleasurable becomes neutral and sometimes aversive. Take the most beautiful music that you love in the world. I love the Bach music, for instance. So I can listen maybe 3 times to the same piece. But imagine 24 hours non-stop. Now they use that at Guantanamo to torture people. Non-stop music.
Yep.
Now you take a wonderful hot shower.
I'm not sure it's Bach, though. I'm not sure.
Or maybe
in
not.
all fairness,
Yeah,
maybe some
Bach.
hard metal and
Probably,
stuff like
yes.
that. Yeah.
Okay. So you take a hot shower after going in the cold in the winter. It's paradise. But 24 hours in a hot shower, no go. So it's just different. And also, you may feel great pleasure, and if everybody is suffering around you in a very selfish way, so which are things that do not contribute to happiness. So it's not sensation. And again, people who will, and there are people like that, constantly trying to rekindle pleasurable sensation all the time. That's a recipe for exhaustion, not for happiness. So what is happiness? It's more like, rather than a sensation, it's a way of being. Of course, that's nice if you have a pleasurable environment, but it's not absolutely intrinsically linked with happiness, because you could be, as I say, have the joy of living still, in circumstances that people would not choose as the best, most pleasurable environment. Why is it different? Because this kind of way of being you can cultivate it's not one thing with happiness with a big H. That's why there's no happiness center in the brain. It's a cluster of human qualities. No sense of inner freedom, inner strength, that you are not so dependent on people what say or not say, or all these preoccupations, that you have your own sort of balance and inner peace, and you can deal with stuff, that you are open to others, less me all the time. So all those qualities together, in fact, at the contrary of pleasure, the more you experience them, the more they deepen and become more stable. It's like the more you practice tennis or piano, the better you come at it. So instead of exhausting themselves like pleasure, like a candle that burns. So this is a different continuum. So nothing wrong with pleasure, simply it's a different thing.
You mentioned at the onset how when you were younger, you noticed that great piano players, artists, philosophers, they were celebrated. People, to some extent, could measure their skill. And yet, until you began to study Buddhism with certain teachers and monks, it never occurred to you that we should also be celebrating those that are mindful and happy in a similar way. Do you see any examples of that happening outside of this notion that you're the happiest man in the world? Are there efforts underway where you believe we are celebrating the right behaviors and the right learnings?
Well, I was surprised in France to see, I go back from time to time, and it's been more these days, when you see they have every year this opinion poll, which is the most admired person in France. Over the years, systematically, it was people like the Abbé Pierre. He's a kind of equivalent, I don't know how. He spent all his life working for the homeless. At some point where there was a big cold span, he burst into a radio station and took the mic, and live he said, we need 20,000 blankets now in the street. So anyway, he did that. So for 20 years, he was the most loved French person. And then there was a sister, she's a Christian sister, who works in the suburbs in Egypt, with very poor kids. And then there was Cousteau, who is a scientist who take care of the ocean. So there were people actually that people knew who is someone who you admire. And so I thought that was neat, that people do recognize. If you ask them who is the greatest moral figure, you come with Gandhi, Martin Luther King, the Dalai Lama, Nelson Mandela. So I think that's comforting that deep within, people have a sense of who they could take as role model somehow, or as a compass for your moral sense.
Let's turn to the new book, which is out today, Altruism. There are some really important principles and fundamentals here that Matthieu believes could have impact on global society in multiple ways, across 3 time dimensions. In the immediate term, he believes greater focus on altruistic practices can help lift the global economy. Over the intermediate term, he believes that greater practice of altruism can increase life satisfaction and happiness. And over the longer term, he believes that it can start to improve the environment. And we all know how important that's going to be. Can you talk more about the specifics?
Well, going around the world, meeting wonderful people like all of you here today, you sense that there is a very great challenge of reconciling those 3 time scales. You get economists, and basically they are concerned about the day-to-day stock market, end of the month and the year sort of balance sheet, isn't it? And it's very hard for them to think 50 years. It doesn't mean it's not their job. So then, therefore, their focus is on the short term. And then, of course, if that is linked with an extremely sort of selfish attitude, playing the casino with the savings that people have entrusted you with just to get a big bonus at the end of the year, like we saw with the subprime crisis, then it's really detrimental to society. So then, but even they care somehow, but they don't know how to do. If you say to an economist, you need to be altruistic, they say, I can be on my life, but it's not what economy is about. And then you have, on the other end of the spectrum, scientists of the environment who tell you what's going to happen in 50 years. But then, we are not equipped emotionally to react to that, because if I tell you there's a rhinoceros coming full speed here, everybody jumps. If I say there will be a rhinoceros in 30 years, you say, so what? We'll see. So that's difficult for us to really care about something in the future. So they know what's going to happen, but it's irrelevant to economists. And then in the middle, you have the people who take care of the quality of life in society, inequalities, taking 1.5 billion people out of poverty, and so forth, providing good system. So this kind of schizophrenic sort of relation, because we want to make a better world, but they don't talk the same language. So then, meeting all these wonderful, inspiring people all over the world, and I thought, would there be one concept that could serve as a foundation for them to speak together and work together for a better world? And I thought the most simplest one and most obvious one is having more consideration for others. There's no rocket science. So if you have more consideration for others, then you will care for the people who entrusted you with their finances, or to society at large. So economy will be at the service of society instead of the opposite. So the concept of caring economics came up, and there are many distinguished economists like Dennis Snower, who founded the Global Economic Symposium, which is a very nice organization, that says, caring economics, using not only the voice of reason that's supposed to maximize your personal interest, that's the definition of the Homo economicus, is a very reductionist caricature of human beings. First of all, we know that human beings are not so rational. Daniel Kahneman has showed that. Many studies have showed that. And the neuroscience study at Stanford have shown that investors, when they do a risky investment, they are flooded with emotions. So they are anything but rational. So then if you are flooded with emotion, better have the right ones instead of just greed and selfishness and so forth. So the idea of caring economics can do two things which the Homo economicus cannot do. One is looking after poverty in the midst of plenty. Maximizing your personal interests never addresses that. You better have people in Bangladesh working for nothing, doing t-shirts for $1, and then that's good for maximizing your personal interest. The second thing, and inequalities are one of the main challenges of our times. At Davos Economic Forum, for 2 years at a row, it was defined as the main challenges of our times. Now, to reduce inequality, which are growing in all the 36 OECD countries. Second thing that selfish economy cannot do is the common goods. Common goods means environment, the quality of the air, quality of the ocean, freedom, resolution of conflict, because it benefits everyone. But to do something for that, you have to step out of maximizing your personal interest. So that's for caring economists. That's having more consideration for others. Now in society, for the midterm, you will do something in education, in the social work, at the workplace, in education, in the transport, so that people, have more chance to flourish in life, to fulfill their potential, to have a sense of life satisfaction. Because if a country is the richest and most powerful and everybody is miserable, what's the point? So satisfaction of life means moment to moment, what is your satisfaction in the day? And then when you look at 10, 20 years, how you see your life in a positive way or with regret and frustration. That's major importance. And now there's a new challenge which we didn't have until recently, because 10,000 years ago there was 1 to 5 million people on Earth. 1 to 5 million, so they could not do any damage at all. But now, slowly, almost without us noticing, we have become the major agent having impact on the biosphere. We entered the Anthropocene. Our means of actions on the world has multiplied thousandfold with the industrial, scientific, technological revolution. So we are responsible for the fate of future generations in a big way for the first time in our history. So however complex scientifically, politically, economically the question of the environment is, it boils down to altruism versus selfishness. Groucho Marx, and I'm a Marxist, but that kind of tendency, he said, why should I care for future generation? What did they do for me? So if you think that way, unfortunately, I heard a few billionaires saying the same thing about the rise of the oceans, and I find it absurd to change my behavior now for something that happened in 100 years. So then if you don't care, I think none of us will be there in 100 years unless there's a 7-year-old here who will live a long time. So if we don't care, that's it. Why bother about the environment? We'll probably survive, the next 30 years. So that's why altruism is the concept that allows those people to talk together for a better world. That's pretty simple.
So let's open it up to the audience for questions. We have a mic here in the middle.
Hi, thanks for being here. So I have 2 questions for you, actually. The first one is, any specific habits that you recommend to start to shift towards a more altruistic thinking versus a selfish thinking? And then second question, I've been working on my own meditation habit, and I've never considered specifically infusing it with compassion. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate on that a little bit, what it means to do that and how it's different from just meditating.
Sure. So, why would you do any kind of training or change your dispositions and habits, whatever you may call, for instance, doing physical fitness? It's because, it's not necessarily pleasant to be jogging at 6 in the morning, but people do that. So why do they do? Because they have some enthusiasm from seeing the benefit of that. And even if it's not immediate, they know that if they persevere, they will feel better in their body and better in their mind. It was shown even for that physical exercise is one of the best antidote to depression. So it's good for everything. And then you know that, so therefore you are ready to do the effort. We are ready to go to schools, to have a professional training, because we know it's going to be good for our life. So I think if you kind of make a sense of the experiential benefit of being a kinder person, having more benevolence, compassion, and see how it's a win-win situation. Because, if you look at the work of just not even to speak about Buddhism, but the work of positive psychology, like Barbara Fredrickson, one of the founders, she wrote a book saying that love is the supreme emotion. Love in the sense of positive resonance with others, which is another way to speak of benevolence and openness. Because it opens your mind, it brings along a lot of other positive effects. So for you, it's the best way to flourish. And of course, people around you will feel much better than if you are completely selfish. So in that sense, by experiencing the benefit or the virtue of altruism for yourself, and seeing also how it changed your relation with others, and the relation with others being probably the most important factor in determining well-being, the quality of human relationship. So it seems that it is a good thing to cultivate. Now about compassion, well, of course, there are many meanings to this word. Both in psychology and in Buddhism, fortunately, there's an agreement on that. Basically, the most fundamental thing is this altruistic love. And altruistic love, again, is not kind of this very sweet sort of, sentimental kind of, or even, it's more a sense of, why not? Why it would be so nice if people were happy and find a cause of happiness, because no one wakes up in the morning thinking, may I suffer the whole day? So it'd be great if they're happy. This kind of sense, may they be happy, and if I can do something about that, why not? I'm ready to do it. So that. Now, when that sort of benevolence, so if it's anyone in general, say, may they be happy. But if you encounter suffering, then that becomes compassion, and it's defined as it's the equivalent of benevolence applied to suffering. It becomes simply the wish, may that suffering and the causes of that suffering be dispelled. And how that transition comes, there's a catalytic factor we call empathy. Empathy is resonance with others. So you know that that person is joyful, and you know that person is suffering. And that it elicits in your mind some kind of joy or some kind of suffering that is real. So it gives you some information about the situation of the other person. So when empathy tells you that person is suffering, you should not stay just in empathy, because if you just stand alone empathy, suffering, you may burn out, get into emotional distress. But it's just take as a trigger for benevolence to become compassion. That means you become concerned with people's suffering, and that's what we call compassion.
So one thing that you may find helpful in your meditation practice, if you want to incorporate compassion, just kind of a simple tool, is while you're meditating, at some point think about how it benefits the people that you care about, the people in your life. And that could be an easy little device to help.
Yeah, one thing, if I may add to,
of course,
this is a wonderful remark, but we should start, if you start sailing in the sea, you start with fine weather, not when it's storm. Mm-hmm. So you should begin with someone for whom there's no problem to feel unconditional love, a beautiful child or someone you love, or a pet or whatever. And then, once that has filled your mind, then try to extend that a little bit, extend the circle to people you don't know, and even difficult cases, the people you really don't like. Because it's not about liking a bloody dictator. It's loving kindness and compassion, nothing about that. It's wishing that, may the circumstances that made that this person is filled with cruelty, with indifference, with greed, may that be dispelled. So compassion is really about any cause of suffering, wherever it is, whatever shape it takes. It's not a moral judgment. Moral can be there, but it's more like a doctor. If you see a very mad, harmful person, doctor is not going to take a big stick and bash the person. He's going to control the violent person, then see, can there be a cure? If not, you just keep on controlling him or her. But if there is a cure, why not? Instead of bashing them. So that's the way you can extend it, starting with the easiest and extending it further.
So Matthieu, you just touched on something that I think really resonates. We spend a lot of time at the company talking about managing compassionately. It's a first principle of ours, and one of our core values is relationships matter, and that's probably the most crystallized version, the clearest manifestation of relationships matter for us. And one of the questions I'm asked most often, you just really nailed, which is it's easy to be compassionate with people you care about, people you like, and people you trust and respect. It's really difficult to be compassionate when you can't stand them. And my response is always, compassion is not conditional. It is at its greatest value when you are extending compassion to those that you would historically find most difficult to connect with. How, practically speaking, would you encourage people in the moment to practice compassion? I love the metaphor of sailing on calm waters versus starting with a troubled sea. But for those in the audience, for those that are watching via the stream, they're in a meeting. They're, in a discussion that ultimately leads to a debate. It gets kind of heated. And there's not mutual trust there, and there's not mutual respect, and perhaps these people have some baggage, they have some history. In that moment, what would you suggest would enable someone to better practice unconditional compassion?
So when you said it gets heated, it's escalation, right? So escalation means two people escalate. No, you cannot clap with one hand. You need two hands to clap. So we did studies of confrontation, not far from here in Berkeley, with Paul Ekman and Bob Levinson. So they wanted to see, if a meditator, it happened to me, again, me as a guinea pig, but they did it with others as well, how they would behave, because they're studying conflict resolution, in spouses and people who really can stand each other at some point, and see how conflict escalates and how you could have a different attitude. So they said, well, let's see what happens with a meditator. So they said, first we'll get a very wonderful person. So I can name him because he's a wonderful person. It's Professor Glaser, who's a Nobel Prize of Physics. And the idea was to put him on two questions that we think is really crazy, like about a PhD in molecular genetics will go to become a monk in the Himalayas. And then someone who might believe in reincarnation, who knows, give us a break, So, and then we had a wonderful conversation. We were all hooked up with sensors and measuring our heart rate, or all kinds of stuff, sedation. They were filming our macro expression on the face. And we had a wonderful conversation, and it went very well. After we wanted to continue. And then they said, now we are going to bring the most difficult person in the campus of Berkeley. And I won't tell you who it was.
Did he know he had been selected based on that criteria? No, okay.
They had a hard time actually to bring him in the lab. He said, why I'm coming here, something. So I
consistent with
So I told him, we are going to have a confrontation on those. He said, no, it's not going to be difficult with me, he said. Okay. So he started and went, full blast, and I sort of discussed with him, and then the scientists were all watching behind black windows, mirrors. And they saw the physiology, being like, and then we're going blah, 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 blah. And then at the end, this guy said, I can't fight with this guy. He's smiling all the time, he's saying reasonable thing, and even said, there's something, that comes out of him, I can't fight. So the idea, okay, so now what happens in a kind of difficult situation? So I think no matter what, if you retain this kind of, your own sort of, I would say sometimes values, but value, I mean more here, just being well disposed toward others. Of course, doesn't mean you are stupid and you let yourself run you over like a carpet. No, non-violence doesn't mean that you are passive, submissive, and nothing at all. You could be extremely strong inside, but as just kind, proper, benevolent behavior. Now, what happens? In the best case, the person calms down because there's no escalation, no two hands, and then you can talk reasonably about a difficult point. In the worst case, it doesn't, but at least you remain at peace. So in both cases, that's sort of the best strategy no matter what. The Buddha once was insulted by somebody. And he didn't mind much. Like the Dalai Lama often is, some people say it's a snake in ropes and stuff like that, or a devil. He said, okay, no problem. So, and the Buddha said to that person, when someone wants to give you something and you don't take it, with whom does it remain? And the guy said, well, with the person who's trying to give it. Well, he said, I don't accept your insults, so they remain with you. So in a way, he was not being sort of sarcastic. It's just say, if I keep my composure, I don't go into this escalation of becoming like the person who is aggressive and nasty and so forth. In best case, it will help for conflict resolution. In the worst case, at least me, I won't fall in that trap of becoming like this person or like the defect I don't like in that person. So I think this is the thing where you can't lose, basically. And things doesn't work. They probably would not have worked anyway if you go into a big fight. So I think it's the best strategy.
Ray talks about becoming a spectator to your own thoughts, especially when you become emotional.
Yes.
And I think that's very consistent, and perhaps you guys...
Well, that applies to everything. If you are very anxious about something, missing a plane or something, and then at the beginning, anxiety or anger or jealousy feels, there's nothing but that in your mind. It's like you are identified almost with this feeling or emotion. But then there's the faculty of awareness. The mind can watch, like you watch a fire burning in front of you. So now the trick here, the wonderful thing is being aware of anxiety is not anxious, it's aware. Being aware of anger is aware. So then you have two spaces, one of awareness, one of anger. And then the magic of that, if you don't add wood on the fire by thinking, oh, this guy, why did that again? Go back to the trigger, but keep on watching the strong, raw emotion. Look at it, not at the guy nasty guy who triggered the emotion. If you look at it, it's like looking at a fire without adding wood. It's bound to die out. So space of awareness will grow. The anger will lose its solidity, its kind of power to constrain your mind. It will look more less and less solid until it's sort of almost irrelevant.
That's great.
Thank you for coming in today and sharing your wisdom with us. Really appreciate that. I have a question for you. One of the elders in my family, whom I respect a lot for his altruist outlook, died recently. He was very rich once upon a time, and he died broke and broken because of excessive looting of his own assets from someone who presented themselves as good and took his money. Was he possibly excessively altruistic? Is there a concept of excessive altruism?
So, sorry, I didn't hear completely. He got broke because of what?
So there were just people around him who just looted him by giving him sad stories, and he'd just keep helping people around. And then he just died broken because when all his money was done, he was abandoned. And so he was really broken.
That getting broken. The idea of that it's a sacrifice. It's very relative. If he felt great joy in doing that, it's not a sacrifice. He's not broke. He's just happy to have done some good. I have an example of my friend Bunker Roy. I don't know if you heard of him. He started the Barefoot College in India. He was a brilliant high family in India, to the best college, and his mother wanted him to go to the World Bank or something. And there was a famine 50 years ago in Bihar. So he went there. There was a Gandhian friend of Gandhi there. And he was 18 years old. He went with some friend and came back and told his mother, I'm going to live in the village. She almost went into a coma. And then the brother said, no, don't worry, he's going to come back. But he never came back. And then he started, digging wells, and he started this training illiterate grandmothers to become, solar engineers, all kinds of wonderful things. Now, for him, it may look as a sacrifice, but it was such a fulfillment. So now you say, giving everything. Me, I'm a monk, I don't need anything. So when the monk and the philosopher, I saw the contract coming, my father and an agent, which very few French writers have, and I saw the numbers, I said, what am I going to do with that, So I went back to the publisher, I said, I don't want a contract with me, I'm out of the system for 25 years, I'm going to get the French tax on top of me. I don't want that money. So make a contract, not with me, but with a foundation. First it was a big foundation in France, then we had our own foundation. So since then, basically 100%, I didn't share or give 10%, 50%, just all of it. But I don't miss it, I don't feel broke. I have no personal resources, but I feel completely happy with that. I didn't need to buy a Ferrari or a swimming pool. Nothing against that, but simply that was not what I was looking for. So I don't feel broke, but I did also sort of try to give everything, and I think that's fine. So it all depends of what kind of satisfaction you do. One of the most hidden philanthropist of 20th century. I think Mr. Feeney, who had all this tax-free shopping. Nobody knew who he was. He gave $15 billion.
Duty-free shopping.
Yes.
Yep.
So, but he was caught in the end because they thought there was something fishy in the Cayman Islands, and he had to show that he gave billions of dollars. But he said, I'm so happy to do what I do. You know, this brings me huge fulfillment. So I think that's all about how you perceive that. And of course, if maybe some relatives say, you know, they should have given this to us, but what to do?
Oprah recently was interviewing someone. She does some great stuff with regard to mindfulness and spirituality on some of the shows she's doing on OWN. And one of her favorite lines recently was on the subject of sacrifice. And the person she was interviewing defined it as giving up what you don't need to pursue that which is most important.
Well, I mean, also, I would not call it sacrifice, because it has this idea of mortifying yourself. It's a fulfillment, it's freedom. No, would you say that a bird that leaves a golden cage is sacrificing or renouncing his cage? He's getting freedom from the golden cage. You know, a cage, whether it's gold or iron, is still a cage. So.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up. We want to be very respectful of your time. Matthieu, thank you so much for joining us today. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you, Jeff. It was wonderful.
Thank you both so much for such an amazing discussion. If you all want to spend more time with Matthieu today, he's going to be back here at 12:30 to do a special meditation session, which should be amazing. So I encourage you to come back. And then also, if you want more information about Karuna Sechen, we have a list outside you can write your name on, and they'll get you on their email list. If you're not in the room, you can go to go/Ricard and fill it out there. And then lastly, for everyone in the room, he will be sticking around to...
I just want to say one word.
Wants to say one word.
Over the last month, we managed to help 41,000 victims of the earthquake in Nepal in 165 villages. So we are so-called a small organization, but I found out to my great dismay that we brought more resources than the French government to Nepal. And so we are very happy to do that. And welcome to support that.